You know, typically you'd see lists like this towards the middle of June rather than the middle of July, but apparently we just play it different over here on this channel. 2020 has been a very strange year, mainly because of the COVID-19 outbreak, obviously. However, surprisingly, there hasn't really been a shortage of quality music within this year, and I just want to give a spotlight to five albums that I've been loving this year, returning to quite a bit. Also, before we start, I just want to say I am sorry that I keep changing the backdrop of my videos. The last two videos I've done, I've put my camera in like a different part of the room and tried to record there. It was way too dark in those videos, and I don't have like a light that I can set up to shine on myself to make it brighter. I used to have one, I don't have it anymore for some complicated reasons, but yeah, that's the situation. Anyway, these albums are in no particular order. Let's get into it. Archie Marshall's third album under the KRULE name is yet another dreary, immersive and captivating experience. There's some really mellow and contemplative moments on this album, such as Alone Omen 3, Don't Let the Dragon Drag On, as well as the fantastic opening track Cellular. There's also incredibly intense and gripping tracks on this album, such as Supermarché, forgive me if I'm saying that wrong, as well as the track Stoned Again, which is probably one of my favourites on this album. And you know, Archie's just been coming through with this like infectious and compelling punk energy that's just resonating throughout his last two releases, this one and The Ooze, and I love how that energy manifests itself in songs like these. Speaking of punk, there's quite a whole lot of stylistic variety all over this album. There is punk and post-punk, but Archie also draws on trip-hop, hip-hop, jazz. Something I've noticed while reading and scanning through some of the reviews for this album is that the critical reception is a lot more mixed than it is on his last couple of albums under the KRULE name. And a reason I've seen cited for that by a number of professional critics is the bleak feel of the album becomes a bit too one-dimensional after a while. I guess some critics were hoping for more of a switch-up in that regard, but I think Man Alive feels as immersive and as captivating and as compelling as all of Archie's past work under the KRULE name, and it's a pretty fantastic listen. You should definitely go and listen to it if you haven't already. R.A.P FERREIRA, the latest pseudonym of Wisconsin rapper Rory Allen FERREIRA, and it's not actually a pseudonym, is it? Because it's literally just his name. But anyway, that's not the point. I've really enjoyed Rory's abstract and philosophical writing style up to this point. However, Rory seems to be going in a slightly different direction in terms of the sound palettes and the production all over this album, as he co-produced this with Kenny Siegel and the Jefferson Park Boys. These guys all work so well together to drum up a variety of jazz rap beats, ranging from more mellow and delicate beats on tracks like Doldrums and Leaving Hell, to more hard-hitting beats on tracks like Greens and also the boom-bap flavoured Absolutes. It's just one fantastic sound palette after another, over which Rory delivers some of his most sharp, thought-provoking and witty lyricism to date. There's a handful of lines on here that I would pick out as some of my favourites on the album, two of which come from the track Leaving Hell, where Rory says, "Being piss poor corrupted the discourse." There's another line where he says, "In buildings where if I wasn't a performer, they wouldn't let me pass the foyer." Something to be said is that Rory does stick very much to his heady and abstract writing style that has won over a lot of abstract hip-hop fans in the past. However, there's just a newfound confidence and technical proficiency that he displays on this album that I haven't heard on another album of his in a very long time, if at all. I just can't get enough of this album. It hasn't come off my rotation since I first heard it, and I'm sure it's going to be many people's pick for the best hip-hop album of the year. It certainly is mine so far. Dua Lipa's new album, Future Nostalgia. I did not foresee myself enjoying this album nearly as much as I did, but it's fantastic, and here's why. Most of what I'd heard from Dua Lipa up to the point of her releasing this album was some of her bigger singles that, you know, get played on the radio a lot. She's very big, especially here in the UK, and I thought some of them were okay, but I didn't think any of them were gripping enough They kind of forced me to want to go and listen to her full-length albums. I wasn't really interested in Dua Lipa or interested in hearing where she was going next until I decided, you know what, let's get into this album here, Future Nostalgia, because I already did like one of the songs that came out, Don't Start Now. That song really has been getting played everywhere, and it is a great song. I heard that and I was like, you know what, this album has fantastic critical reception, so I'll jump into it and see what I can take from it. I'm very happy to report that this album is great, and it sees Dua Lipa taking elements of 70s and 80s music and what was popular at the time in the worlds of disco and dance pop, and incorporating that into her own more modern music. Hence the album title, Future Nostalgia. Dua Lipa's taking elements of music that people are nostalgic for from the 70s and 80s and putting her own modern and even sometimes futuristic spin on it. This album is just one enjoyable and well-made and catchy pop song after another. The instrumentation is rich, it's grand, it's lush, and Dua Lipa's vocal performances are often very confident and very expressive. Obviously, this album has massive single power. Most of the tracks on this album feel like they could be singles, they could be standalone songs that can be played in any context and enjoyed by a large number of people. However, it's done well in an album format. The album is consistent, the album is cohesive, and it's just a fantastic album. Go and listen to it if you haven't already. Sean Bowie, aka Yves TUMOR, comes through with a new stylistic direction on a new album. After delivering an experimental and a psychedelic mix of sounds on their previous album, 2018's Safe in the Hands of Love, Sean Bowie comes back and embraces live rock instrumentation as well as pop structure to create a fantastic album that still manages to embody the eccentric aesthetic that Sean Bowie has incorporated into his music up to this point that has made it so compelling. There's a number of just wonderful, tightly structured songs on this album that are some of my most played songs of the year in general. I'm talking about tracks like Kerosene, an anthemic and luscious rock song that features Diana Gordon. There's some fantastic vocal chemistry between the two, and there's also some killer guitar solos and riffs in there as well. There's also the glam rock inspired Superstars, which features vocal from Hirakish, who I'm not really familiar with before listening to this song. However, it's a fantastic highlight on the album. It's a very sensual and a very upbeat moment. There's a few songs on here that kind of function more as extended motifs rather than fully fleshed out songs. I'm talking about tracks like Hasdallen Lights as well as Asteroid Blues, which leads into the fantastic closing track on this album. I can see why some people might skip over these tracks and think they're a bit less compelling than some of the other ones because they're not as fully fleshed out as tracks like Kerosene, tracks like Superstars, etc. However, I think they still add a lot of colour and a lot of flavour to the album. I must say, there's a couple of tracks that come back to back here on the track listing that I'm not too keen on, those being Folie Imposse, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, forgive me again if I'm not, as well as the song Strawberry Privilege. With the song Folie Imposse, I really do love the choppy and the bouncy instrumentation. However, Bowie's vocals are just really flat and really lifeless. There's just not much going on there. The same can be said for the other song, Strawberry Privilege. I really like the instrumentation here. However, Bowie's like really high-pitched vocals just wear way too thin for me. Still, despite these two missteps in the track list towards the end of the album, there's still so much great material on here. Again, this is another album that hasn't left my rotation since I first heard it. Give it a listen, it's fantastic stuff. Finally, beloved electronic and experimental artist Nicolas Jaar comes through with yet another album on this list that is a stylistic shift from the artist's previous work. On the first album under the Against All Logic name, 2012 to 2017, Nicolas Jaar opted for something that was a lot more sample heavy than anything you'd heard from him previously, and he created something that was at times irresistibly groovy and funky, and at other times atmospheric and contemplative. Doing all of this while sticking to a foundation of deep house music. Seriously, this album is so good, you must listen to this. However, on this new album here, Nicolas Jaar strips things back and really incorporates elements of industrial music, deconstructed club, IDM, This album is so much more abrasive and hard-hitting than anything you heard on 2012 to 2017. It really is a big switch up. Tracks that really embody this change in direction include the song If You Can't Do It Good, Do It Hard, which features this really funny Lydia Lunch sample. There's also some like metallic and harsh percussion sounds on here which just give it this like clanking feel. The track Alarm is very fittingly titled, as it just kind of gives me this feeling that I just need to get up and run around and just, you know, it just gives me a sense of urgency. It does so well at like capturing urgency in a song. There's a couple tracks closer to the beginning of the album that feel a bit less industrial, a bit less hard-hitting, a bit more mellow and atmospheric. However, these tracks still very much embody that deconstructed foundation of the album. An example that comes to mind is the 3-track stretch that actually kicks off the album, that being Fantasy, If Loving You Is Wrong, and With an Addict. A lot of the samples on this album are just so creative and well placed, almost to the point where they don't even sound like samples anymore. They literally sound like original pieces of sound that Nicholas Jar has composed and kind of just thrown into this atmosphere that he's created for them to exist in. The flow from track to track on this album is fantastic, so much so to the point that if you're not paying attention to what song you're currently listening to, you might not even realise that there's been a transition into another song. That's how seamless this is. It just gives this project such a unified and cohesive feel, and with that, that's pretty much the end of this list. Wow, there's just so much stuff I haven't listened to this year. These 5 albums just cover an extremely small percentage of all the great stuff that's coming out this year. I need to listen to a lot more stuff. There are plenty of albums I've had to leave off the list, obviously, because I just wanted to include 5 albums for the time being. Hopefully I can really pick up my game, listen to a lot more albums before the end of the year, so that I can make a much more detailed and comprehensive end of the year list. Anyway, let me know what your favourite music of the year has been so far. What are the albums that you've just had on your rotation this year that you just can't seem to stop listening to? What albums keep getting stuck in your head? Thank you everybody for watching, and I will see you very soon.